Good evening, everyone. My name is Benjamin, and welcome to what I want to talk about today. um, Before we get into it, a like, a comment, a subscription is greatly appreciated, and I'd love to see if we can reach 1,000 subscribers by the end of the year. Of course, liking, commenting, that helps the algorithm not hate me. And today we're actually talking about 3 senators who are up for re-election in 2024, but who are two of them are very vulnerable and probably will lose re-election. One of them probably won't. We're still going to talk about her, and we're going to talk about why these three are kind of in some danger. And honestly, I could talk about one or two more if I am perfectly honest with you, right? And I'm going to go ahead and throw one of them up. And we'll go ahead and talk about these 4 particular senators. And we're going to talk about them in their own way. So, in Arizona, we have Kyrsten Sinema, who is doing her best to fill the John McCain void that Arizona has. And that's for someone who represents Arizona, is a very good fit for the state, and kind of has their own political fit. Now, McCain, he had a very strong personal brand. After all, he was a POW in Vietnam, and he was a political maverick in a lot of ways. He sided with the Democrats on a number of issues, or at least wasn't completely partisan for the Republicans. And number one, that's one of the reasons why he continued to win Arizona so strongly. I think he won by double digits in 2016, the same year Trump only won by, I think it was like 3 or 5 or 3%, something in that range. So McCain represented Arizona extremely well, as you can tell by that. Sinema seems to be kind of doing that same balancing act, and she joins with another senator we're going to wind up talking about in breaking from what the majority of national Democrats, or at least a lot of Democratic activists, would prefer them to do. And there's a very good reason for that. And it's because Sinema rightly believes that she needs to be moderate, and maybe she even believes her policies herself, and I believe that's the case, is that it's not just political calculus that she's doing, that she needs to be a very moderate person in the Senate in order to retain her seat. I think that she actually believes what she's voting for, similar to Joe Manchin in West Virginia. And I think this irritates a lot of progressives in places like California and New York, where if you have somebody who isn't voting the progressive orthodoxy, or who is a little bit doubtful of it, you can just push them out, threaten them with a primary challenge, and they'll fall in line. Or if they don't, you back their challenger in the primaries, and you win the general, and you have who you want voting the way you want. Basically, that's what happened to Tulsi Gabbard in a lot of ways. Though I think she was just getting bored with all the partisanship. But if you listen to the way a lot of progressives talked about Tulsi Gabbard, you'd forget that they're the ones supporting women. Seriously. It's even true in my comments if you look at them. Gabbard is somebody who absolutely could do better at the national stage than I think she could where she is in Hawaii. And I think that irritates a lot of progressives who want to see Sinema vote in line with what they think she would support, or what they think a Democrat should support. They could realistically challenge her in the primaries If they won, though, they would very much risk losing that seat to a moderate Republican. Though, given the way the Arizona Republican Party is going, maybe they'd still hold on in the general. Don't know yet, given that Mark Kelly was able to win, who seems more in line with what the Democrats want. Then we're going to move to West Virginia, a state where you probably have the perfect fit for an opposite party winning a federal level statewide election. Senator, right? And that's in Joe Manchin. And that's because Manchin represents the type of Democrats that West Virginians grew up with. The type of Democrats who care more about economic policy, minimum wage, union rights, that sort of thing, among others. That sort of issue, but still supports their local policies that the area wants. Support for traditional industries, logging, coal mining, manufacturing, as well as supports the more conservative issues that this area will care about. Guns, pro-life movements, that sort of thing. Joe Manchin excels at playing that political balance. And that's why he's been able to continue. That's one of the reasons why he was able to win re-election, whereas other red state Democrats failed, even if they were decent fits for their state. Claire McCaskill in Missouri, Joe Donnelly in Indiana. Heck, even Bill Nelson in Florida. Heitkamp in North Dakota. And it's actually very similar to the next Democratic senator we're going to talk about. And I think this is the problem with progressive activists, is that they think all Democratic senators represent places like Portland and Oregon, New York City, Seattle, San Francisco. And they don't really have to do the type of political calculus that people like Manchin, Sinema, Tester have to. And also Sherrod Brown, who I'm also going to talk about today. They assume that if you're a Democrat, you have to vote the progressive line. The problem is, if Manchin, Tester, and Sinema voted carte blanche, just straight for the progressive agenda, there's a very good chance that they would fail miserably in general elections in their states. Because all four of the states we're talking about are redder than the national average. Two cases extremely so. One case comfortably so. After all, Trump won Ohio by 8 points in both 2016 and 2020. The only difference was in 2020, that 8 points wound up being about 13% more Republican than the nation as a whole. In Arizona, it's still slightly leaning towards the right, about 5% more Republican than the nation as a whole. But it's close enough that Democrats probably can win it on a relatively average year. But if you run a candidate who's too far to the left, you're going to lose that election. Manchin threads a much tougher, tighter line. And even he is under severe risk. He only won re-election by about 4% in 18. There's a very good chance that even if he manages to get exactly what West Virginians want, which is kind of what he's doing, he's still going to lose to a Republican. And the problem is, even if he somehow, by some miracle, wins loses a primary to a progressive, that progressive is going to get clobbered in the general election. And I don't think progressives quite understand that. I don't think they understand that. Tester is going to be a very interesting interesting figure going forward. In 24, he's got a re-election campaign if he decides to run. If he doesn't, it's going to be a Republican seat, just straight up. Tester has a very good brand in Montana, just like Sinema has in Arizona, just like Manchin has in West Virginia, and just like Sherrod Brown has in Ohio. The problem that Tester is going to have is that he's voting closer to the progressive line than I think Montana voters are going to be willing to go towards. And he may lose re-election regardless. Similar to what Manchin may face. Simply because of how red Montana is. And that's kind of the reality of a lot of these red state Democrats, is that they're facing extremely tough battles to keep their office. And I'm not sure they're going to be able to hold all of them going forward. And Ohio. Sherrod Brown may be in a slightly better position than the other two. I'm excluding Sinema because I think Sinema is kind of in her own subset in this discussion, because Arizona has been trending towards the Democrats, whereas Ohio and West Virginia especially have been trending towards the Republicans. Montana's kind of just staying where it is. And the problem is the Democratic base in Ohio is shrinking to the major urban centers of Cincinnati, Columbus, and Cleveland. Toledo's keeping some of it, but compared to the other three, it's not really that large of a base. And Democrats are losing the support they had in the Ohio River Valley, as well as a lot of the rural areas where you had legacy Democrats, the type that you have in the Iron Range in Minnesota, or the people who voted for Peterson in Minnesota's 7th Congressional District, was it? Which, by the way, flipped as well. Or in a lot of places in Wisconsin, the Driftless area is a good, a great example of that. And Sherrod Brown might run into problems if he doesn't change his brand, or at least use his own personal brand to the advantage he can. Of course, we have a few other states. The state most similar to Ohio in terms of its political geography is Wisconsin. You have an area that used to be fairly swingy, but lean Democratic, the Driftless area, just like the Ohio River Valley, that no longer is supporting Democrats the way they used to, and honestly, the Driftless area is probably going to get redder. While you have some growth in the suburbs, the urban areas just aren't enough if the Democrats keep underperforming in rural areas and losing the rural areas year by year by year. And you have 3 areas where the Democrats, have their base. In Wisconsin, it's Green Bay, Milwaukee, and Madison. And it's kind of hard to see, if the Republicans keep gaining elsewhere in the state, how the Democrats really expand. Because I think they're I think the Democrats do have a ceiling in the suburbs. Or at least among college-educated white voters, as well as a ceiling among white voters in general. And they have a ceiling in rural areas, and they've already reached their ceiling in the urban areas. So basically what we're talking about here is, how do you balance the desire to get the legislation that you want passed with maintaining office in a state that is generally hostile to your party? And Arizona is the one fit that is different, because Arizona isn't hostile to the Democrats to the same extent the other three are becoming or are. But Arizona has its own unique climate where it just hates extremists on either side. It's why you can have an election where Sinema wins the Senate and Ducey wins by 20 points in the governor's race. So, yeah, I mean, that's the thing with Ohio, too, is that Sherrod Brown wins by a decent margin in the Senate race, but you have a Republican elected to the governor's mansion, you have a Republican elected, Republicans win the congressional ballot in the state, and the other statewide elections held that year all favored Republicans as well. West Virginia, similar situation. Montana, similar situation. And that's because the personal brand of these politicians outweighed their partisanship. We'll see if that holds, but as it stands, at least two of these seats are very possible flips. I'd even say, at this stage, ahead of 24, I'd say at least two of these seats are likely to flip. Ohio, we'll have to see what the polling looks like come that time, but the point is, you can't take the standard you'd apply to a California Democrat and apply it to Joe Manchin, or John Tester, or Kyrsten Sinema, or Sherrod Brown even. Just like you can't take a statewide elected Republican in Massachusetts, I guess Charlie Baker, you can't take his standard and his decision making and apply that to someone in Texas, or take, say, Tommy Tuberville, or what you would hold a Republican in, say, Alabama or Oklahoma to, and tell a New England Republican that's what you need to be like. And I think the problem is, a lot of activists in both parties tend to do that because they see the party initial by a candidate's name or a politician's name, and they say, well, why aren't you voting for this, this, and this? Well, maybe the local environment makes it impossible. Maybe that person just genuinely doesn't believe that'll work. So, personal branding still does matter. And being a good fit for your state still matters. And I think that's the lesson I want to get across today. Anyway, thank you all for watching. Hope you enjoyed. I'll see you all next time. Take it easy. Bye-bye.